Hi, everyone. My name is Sana Harwald. I'm the moderator for the Competitive Applicants panel. I really want to thank you for joining us. So I'm eager to get started and help moderate this session where we all can learn from the wisdom of medical students, now rising interns and residents, who can tell us what it's really like to apply to the IR residency program and what it's like to successfully prepare for it. So first I want to go through briefly what the webinar is and how it's going to be organized. So we're going to start with a brief introduction to the IR residency program structure, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, because this is a new residency program and there's lots of different pathways to enter into IR residency training. So we want to make sure that we're just all on the same page before we start. Next, we'll go into introductions of our panelists, who I'm very excited to have you all meet. And then we're going to have two parts of the session where we're really listening to the panel. The first part is the path to becoming a competitive applicant. This is going to discuss topics that are relevant to somebody who is not yet in the application process for IR residency. So things that you can do to strengthen your application before you're actually starting the application itself. The second part of this question and this panelist session will be the application trail. So this is going to be where we ask the panelists to talk about their experiences while they were applying. And then finally, we're going to have time for questions and answers from the audience. So I want to make sure that I share at the beginning that there's a way for you all listening in to share your questions that we'll give to the panelists at the very end of the webinar. So the way that you can share your messages is if you all are in GoToWebinar. At the very bottom, there's a lot of tabs. The bottom tab is chat. And so if you go to chat, you can see it says, to, and you can pick it. Probably the default is that you would send it to everybody. You don't have to. If you'd like to send a message in private, which might be a little bit easier for us to keep track of, send it to SIR staff-organizer. And these questions will be compiled to be asked to the panelists at the end of the meeting. So just something to keep in mind if you have a question that you want to make sure to ask that comes up while we're not yet at the Q&A session. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to give a very brief introduction to the IR residency pathways. So as you probably know, there was a transition a couple of years ago to have the interventional radiology training no longer be a fellowship that diagnostic radiology residents did after they completed their diagnostic radiology training. And instead, now medical students can apply directly into a residency program that will provide interventional radiology training. So what I have here is a figure from the Society of Interventional Radiology. You can see the website here. If you're not familiar with the residency program structure, I strongly recommend this website and other resources from the Society of Interventional Radiology that you can find online to help explain this process. I know that I found it confusing when I was first learning about the residency pathways. So I'm going to go through this very briefly, but basically what you can see here is that there's three main training pathways in IR residency. You have the integrated IR pathway, the independent IR residency, and this independent IR residency can either be with ESIR, which is early specialization in interventional radiology, or without it. And so the main residency program that medical students are applying to directly is the integrated IR residency program. So what this looks like is that you apply to residency at the end of medical school during your fourth year. You subsequently take an internship year. And then during PGY 2, 3, and 4, you'll be taking your diagnostic radiology training with some IR rotations integrated into that. So it'll be similar to diagnostic radiology training for diagnostic radiology residency, but there will be extra IR training built in. And then during postgraduate year 5 and 6, there'll be 2 years of dedicated IR training. And so the total years of training is 6 years. For the independent IR residency, it's a little bit different depending on the structure, the diagnostic radiology residency portion of it here. But in any case, the independent IR residency starts with an internship in the same way. And then during PGY postgraduate year 2 through 5, you're taking your diagnostic radiology residency. So really the choice here is if your diagnostic radiology or DR residency has an ESIR program or not. And you can see that if you take a standard diagnostic radiology residency program, training, that you complete PGY 2 through 4 in diagnostic radiology, or excuse me, PGY 2 through 5 in diagnostic radiology, then have 2 years of IR training. And so that adds up to a total of 7 years of postgraduate training before you're completed your training in IR. Whereas if you have the ESIR program at your diagnostic radiology residency, then that integrates more IR into your diagnostic radiology years. And what that allows you to do is, instead of having 2 years of IR training afterwards, you can qualify with only 1 year of IR training afterwards. So in the end, the advantage of doing the DR program with ESIR is that you would only have 6 years of training as opposed to 7. So that's the integrated and the independent IR residencies, and why you might be interested in finding out if a DR residency has ESIR, because it might allow you to complete your training more quickly. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. And just all of these panelists have applied to the integrated IR residency pathway. So where they apply to this entire training block immediately out of medical school, whereas in independent IR residency, you apply to diagnostic radiology immediately after medical school, and then while you're completing your DR residency, then you apply again to the IR residency, the independent IR residency. So here you would apply just out of medical school, whereas with the independent IR residency, you would technically apply twice. Once to diagnostic, and then when you're completing diagnostic, then you would apply to the independent IR residency. But our panelists that are going to be speaking to us today applied to the integrated IR residency, applying right out of medical school. So with that, I'd love to introduce our panelists. So here you can see our lovely panelists. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, to say their names, where they went to medical school, where they're going next year, or where they're going to do their interventional radiology training. And then just so we can learn a little bit more about them, I'm going to ask each of them to share with us how they decided they wanted to specialize in IR for their careers. And just for those of you listening in, sometimes I have difficulty distinguishing which panelist is speaking sometimes, especially because we don't have the camera. So what you can see at the bottom of the screen here is that actually the names of the panelists are listed. So from left to right is the order the panelists are going to address the different questions, just so you know who's speaking. I know that I find that helpful. So with that, I'd love to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Meghan.
Hi everyone, my name is Meghan Clark, and I went to West Virginia University for medical school, and I recently matched at the University of Virginia for the integrated IR pathway. And I decided that I wanted to do IR early-ish on in my 3rd year. I think it was around November, and I was exposed to minimally invasive image-guided procedures on my vascular surgery rotation, but I liked the general surgery patient population as far as the pathology and all of that. So, and I was talking with a friend who was a year ahead of me in doing IR, and she basically, you know, when I was like, oh, I really like this minimally invasive stuff, but I also kind of like the general surgery people better. I wish we could combine them. And she's like, there is that. It's called IR. And so that's how I decided to do it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Shelby?
Hi, everyone. My name is Shelby Franz. I just graduated from Georgetown, and I just matched IR integrated at Vanderbilt. I will also be completing my general surgery internship here. I was initially exposed to IR beginning of 3rd year because Georgetown offers a 2-week selective, and so I rotated in IR for 2 weeks. At that time, I thought I was going to try to apply for just some type of surgical subspecialty, something where you can do a lot of procedures. I didn't really know a lot about IR at the time, but I found it very intriguing, and I worked a lot with the chief of IR during that rotation, and he did a lot of research in IR. I knew research at that time would help me no matter what competitive specialty I applied to. So I started some IR research at the beginning of 3rd year and just continued that on throughout the year. And it just helped maintain my interest in IR. And I waited until I did my general surgery rotation to help me better compare the two. And I met with the chief and the chairman of IR at Georgetown and just kind of talked about comparing general surgery and IR. And there's actually a handful of people who leave surgery and switch to IR that I spoke with, and so it helped me make my decision. And then finally, I attended the American College of Surgery conference and the SIR conference, both because they both happened to be in DC, which was convenient. But just being at those conferences and interacting with the different individuals in those fields and seeing what the latest research and technology was helped me make my decision. So, thank you.
Wonderful.
Hi, my name is Daryl Goldman. I went to the University of Queensland Auctioner Clinical School, and I matched into IRDR at Mount Sinai in New York City. I first became interested, similar to the other people that have spoken, I was interested in general surgery prior to medical school, and then I worked in Africa and wanted to do general surgery there, kind of thing. And then I spoke to a lot of patients and actually felt like IR was better for patients. And so that's kind of why I fell in love with IR. But I actually first became exposed to it in my neurology rotation and followed a stroke patient to go get a interventional neurology procedure, which was really, really cool. So after that, I was like just in awe of how fast the patient recovered and all of that. So I think it was really the recovery that the patients go through after general surgery versus IR that kind of drew me to IR. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, Daryl.
Hi, my name is Millie Liao. I went to Western University for med school, and then I'll be at Loma Linda for IR. For me, I found out about IR during first year of med school, and since then I was pretty interested in it, but I still kept an open mind throughout rotations during third year, and pretty similar to Meghan, Shelby, and Daryl, that like I was in between IR and surgery, but just seeing the difference in the patient impact, that really swayed me, and then also meeting people who are in IR, to me it's a different vibe, and these are going to be my colleagues that I'll be working with. So overall, that was kind of what led me to IR.
Thanks, Millie. Catherine?
Hi, my name is Catherine Panic. I just graduated from Case Western Reserve, and I'll be at Oregon Health and Science for IR. I think I'm the first one who wasn't interested in surgery out of the panelists so far. I actually came in when I do diagnostic radiology. I had known about IR, but thought diagnostic radiology is just more interesting to me, because what I had been exposed to before med school was some pretty, I guess, more low-key kind of stuff. My hometown hospital was kind of small, but then getting more exposed in medical school kind of opened my eyes to, the fact they do some more high-end procedures that are really cool and stuff I was really interested in, and it seemed to fit me more, especially during third year. I kind of, realized I liked working with my hands a little more. I liked my surgery rotations. I liked working with my hands and teammates, and kind of being in a bit of an OR type environment. But IR was just kind of, just right, kind of like Goldilocks. So that's kind of how I fell into it. It just seemed to fit.
Wonderful, thank you. Rana?
Hey everybody, my name is Rana. I went to Rosalind Franklin for medical school, and I'm going to UCSF for surgery intern year and also the IRDR combined program. I think I started liking IR for maybe the same reasons that teenagers might start smoking. The cool people doing it. Over the years, I met some people that were smart and laid back, and I looked up to them, and I noticed that they were going to IR, or they considered going to IR. So the field came on my radar in that way. The reason that I ended up sticking with it is that as I learned more about myself and the field, I realized that it's a particularly good fit for me. I like working with my hands. I like knowing something about the whole body. I'm not really ready to commit to a specific organ system or body part yet. And I like interacting with patients, but not too much. And I like to be in an area of medicine. Maybe this is the most important thing for me, where there's rapid progress, where creativity is rewarded, and where there is tremendous opportunity for advocacy. And I think that IR uniquely offers all of that, and that's why I ultimately went with it.
Wow, thanks, Rana. Michelle?
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Schneider. I went to the University of Miami for medical school, and I will be doing both my surgery intern year and my IRDR residency at the University of Michigan. So I heard about IR my first year of medical school because my personality is just such that I like went to every interest group meeting that was available, and IR was one of them. And I just really what like was interesting to me was that the procedures that they were doing spanned like so many different fields, and then I was like, wow, you can like access like something in the body without opening people up in surgery. Like I had never heard of anything that sounded so cool. And so I kept it on my radar, like Millie had said she had done. And then in my third year, and during that time, I like went to a bunch of conferences and stuff, both in like ophthalmology, neurology, IR. And then in my third year, I went to an IR conference in Miami, and they had a simulation booth where you can basically practice doing an IR procedure as like the primary operator. And it was like a sim to clot off a bleeder in the splenic artery, and I was manipulating it on my own. And that was the first time that I really like was super hands-on, and I just like was so eager about it, and I loved it, and I was like, oh, can I do it again? And like trying to get other people to like come over and like try this. And so after I left the conference, I was like, yeah, I could see myself like loving doing this and getting excited about it every day. And so that's when I ultimately decided that's my field.
Wonderful. It's one. I think that people listening in, if they are debating about IR, I think what all of you shared is going to help push more people, which makes me happy. Help push more people to think about IR. And with that, we're going to launch into the panel itself and learn from our panelists who are fresh off the application path, or not path, trail. And so they've seen all of these things very recently. So we're going to start with the pathway to becoming a competitive applicant, and start very quickly with, oh my goodness, I decided I wanted to pursue a career in IR, maybe after listening to your guys' answers. So I'd like to quickly ask you, do you have any suggestions? What are the first small steps somebody should take if they realize they want to go into IR and they want to start preparing their residency applications, just in a couple words? And if somebody already said yours, you don't have to necessarily answer, but we want to hear everything you want to share.
So I'll go first. I think it definitely depends on where they are in training. Obviously, a first year is going to respond a lot differently than a third year, but the first thing I would say would be to seek mentorship from people of all different stages in training. I had amazing mentors that were like resident level, early out of their fellowship, and like young attendings to well-seasoned attendings. And I think that each one of them provides a unique perspective on the process and can give you insight that others can't. And so that's what I think the first thing you should do. Otherwise, I'm not really sure. I think it's just very dependent.
No, that's great. That's a great first step, I think.
Perfect. I can go ahead. This is Shelby. I'll jump in.
Yeah.
So those are some great points. I agree. If you are a first year and have already realized you want to go into IR, I would go ahead and join SIR, free membership for students. Apply to be part of the Medical Student Council, the Resident Fellow Student section. Get some leadership positions in that. Also, your school's IR interest group is something very important to get involved in. If you don't have one, start it. Or you can try to help coordinate some symposiums at your school. These are all things that show your genuine passion regarding the field of IR. Additionally, if you're later in the process, like late second year, third year, one of your first steps would probably be to schedule a meeting with the IR chief and chairman at your program, and just to seek their advice and their mentor, like Meghan said, just to try to find a mentor and they can guide you throughout the process. And then lastly, something that I know a couple of us did throughout the residency application cycle is network and go to conferences. I know a couple of us were on Twitter. It helps expose you to the field of IR. There's a lot of attendings and residents on there that share cool cases, and you can learn a lot about the field that way and make sure it's something that you're interested in, and you can network and meet a lot of people. I'll let someone else expand upon that.
Yeah,
okay.
wonderful.
So technically I'm next, but I think that you guys did a great job telling everyone what to do. I was just quickly, I was an IMG, and actually, so my first 2 years in Australia, I had never heard of IR at all. And then so I heard about it late, and I just want to say that I think it's really important to kind of do what Shelby and Megan said about different stages of when you're exposed to it. So I was exposed to it late, and I just kind of, got on the bandwagon late. I wish I had learned about it earlier, but definitely do what they said as soon as you can. Yeah.
Thanks. Millie?
The only other things I would add was, so if you're later, I'd say like if you're towards the end of MS2 or third year, then definitely set up a rotation just to see what it's actually like to be in the field. And then also doing some research. Research for me, the projects were definitely great, but it was also a way to network and develop those relationships with attendings and residents.
Great.
The only thing I have to add to that is to talk to people a year or 2 years ahead of you at your school that have gone into IR or considered IR. I think they're wonderful resources. Start local, and definitely there's no reason anyone who is serious about IR that they shouldn't join RFS or Medical Student Council. I think everyone who's interested in this field should be involved in RFS in some way.
Yeah, I have quickly, just to add on that, every interview I had, they told me that the most important thing was like, are you a member of SIR? Are you like part of the RFS? I just think that that's really important, and things that like, if somebody else has that, it's just, it's important that everybody has that.
I think
sorry, just to round this out, I would say yes, everything that everybody is saying is 100% true and perfect, and I would have said the exact same thing. That one other thing I would add would be, yes, do all the steps, check all the boxes that people say you should do, but don't just do it to check the boxes. Like, find what within every category that everybody is saying that you should do, like research or getting involved with like an interest group. Find what within that you actually really enjoy and pursue that, because otherwise you're just going to be doing things that you don't like doing. And hopefully like you'll like it regardless because you're interested in IR, but just like find what you like to do.
I think, sorry, I missed jumping in earlier. I think just to echo that, something that I think residencies are looking for is, you have an interest, but you have to show them you have an interest, and whatever you like or enjoy, whether it is research or SIR, going to meetings, etc. You just have to do something that shows them you're interested, because you can be as interested as you want, but you have to, be able to talk about that and kind of back that up. So anything you can do will help.
Great. Does anybody else have anything else for this topic? We're actually going to talk about a lot of these things, research, leadership, scheduling rotations in IR and DR. Okay. So we'll go on to the next set of slides, but I think that was a great introduction to a lot of things that we'll talk about in more depth. And so I think that was a great start. So first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to start at the beginning, the preclinical years for medical school. I know there's people in pre-med now who are interested in IR, but we're going to start with the preclinical years of medical school. So everyone talks about studying for step 1. So I'm just pulling from a paper that I actually highly recommend. You can see the citation here, and it's looking at folks who matched into the integrated IR program. So that's where you match at the end of medical school into both DR and IR, as our panelists have. And as you can see, the average USMLE Step 1 score is fairly high. It's about 245 for the mean. And I know that, that requires a lot of studying and work. And according to this study, a fair number of program directors use a cutoff for Step 1. It looked like the average that they saw in this paper was 225. So as much as we focus sometimes a lot on the clinical years, the preclinical years and Step 1 do seem to be important when we're talking about trying to make your application what all you want it to be and all it can be. So the questions that I have for the panelists are, in addition to studying for Step 1, what other activities would you recommend during the preclinical years in particular before you start your clinical things? And then what advice would you give to a medical student interested in IR who was disappointed with his or her step 1 score? Is there anything in particular you would recommend? Starting with Meghan.
Okay, so I think this is a great question. I think that, frankly, there's not a whole lot you can do in your first 2 years outside of studying for step 1 that could make up for doing bad on step 1. So I would devote pretty much all of my energy to studying for step 1. That's kind of what I did. I would do it again. I didn't do a whole lot of, I had nothing to show extracurricularly for my first 2 years. If you can make it work and you're just a baller and can do it all, then you should definitely do that. But if you are stretched thin, I wouldn't, get a bunch of volunteering hours or like try to do a bunch of research and then get a 230 on step 1 like that. I think that your time, in my opinion, is best spent on studying medicine and learning how to apply it, because not only are you studying for step 1, but you're also learning how to do well on your rotations. If you know step 1 material, you're going to crush your rotations, and that's what's going to make you competitive for IR in any specialties. So I think in the early years, the main thing is just study hard and do what you can. I don't really have any other recommendations because I didn't do anything else and I couldn't do anything else. And then advice for what I would say for people who are interested in IR but are disappointed. I think that obviously depends on your expectations. If you're in the 240s, I would definitely say still apply to IR and do what you can. If you get below that or whatever your advisor says, I would definitely pursue the DR route and boost your application with doing really well on your clinical rotations, because that's very important especially for IR. And then research and stuff like that. But other than that,
no, you're covering. Counts. Yeah. Oh yeah. Step 2 counts. You're covering good stuff, a good amount of stuff we're going to cover later. So you're like ahead of the game, Meghan.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. So it's a good segue. Shelby, do you have anything to add for preclinical years?
Definitely. So I think Meghan and I were a little bit different. I am always someone that I think I have to have my hands in a lot of different pots. So I might have even over-involved myself in the first 2 years and didn't commit as much time to step 1 because I didn't do maybe as well as I had hoped. Because I was volunteering, I held some leadership positions in some clubs because I was initially interested in ophthalmology, and I had some other surgery research from the summer after first year. I do recommend doing some research the first summer after first year, because most schools you have all of that time off, and it's a great time to get a project in if you do know what you want to go into. So I recommend doing that. But yes, otherwise you really should focus on studying for step 1. It's extremely important given the competitiveness. But just to expand upon that a little bit, because I wasn't as pleased with my step 1 score, I tried to remedy that by getting very involved in research, maintaining a good relationship with mentors in IR at my institution. That way they got to know me very well. I worked really hard on my home IR rotations. That way they could really give a lot of detail about my daily work ethic. And I think good letter of recommendations go a very long way in the residency application process. Additionally, if you feel like you didn't do as well in step 1, Georgetown lets us schedule a study month early in our 4th year. So I had a study month in August and took step 2 at the end of August. That was early enough that I would get the grade back to be able to submit it right after we submitted ERAS applications. So you submit ERAS September 15th, and I got the grade back like a week or 2 after that, and could update all of the programs with my improved step 2 score. So that's a way to kind of remedy a step 1 score that you weren't so happy with.
Great. Daryl, do you have anything to add?
I was just gonna I agree with both of those two as well, but I would say that and we're gonna talk about this later. But I think away rotations and as well as doing really well on your rotations at home are really good opportunities to just improve on that. I think yes, I think step one is important, and yes, I would advise to study as hard as you can for it. But I think that there are other things that are very important as well, and that you can make up for it. So I just want to say that.
Okay, wonderful. I think you all covered that really well. So we're going to go through 2 years just like that on one slide, and now talk about the clinical years. So just in terms of general scheduling for IR and DR rotations, for the panelists for this slide, how many rotations did you take in IR and DR? Were they home or away? And how many would you recommend in each of those different fields or locations, home versus away, IR versus DR? And when would you recommend scheduling these rotations during the course of your third and fourth years, assuming sort of a traditional schedule where the clinical years are the last 2 years? Starting with Shelby.
Okay, so I had the 2-week elective in IR during third year. That's really all we had at Georgetown. I know every med school is a little bit different when you might get some early exposure. If you don't have an early rotation, I would try to shadow on the weekends or whenever, just to get some FaceTime in with the department and make sure IR is for you. I did a home Georgetown 1 month in IR in September, like the entire month of September. And then I did an away in California in IR because I didn't have any ties to the West Coast and wanted to open up that area to show my genuine interest in moving there for residency. And then finally, I did an away in Florida, which is my home state. And that was from October 23rd to November 19th. And so that's on the later side. I feel like most students were done with their aways. But like I said, I put a study month earlier. But I didn't feel like it was too late for an away. And it was nice because it was kind of around the interview time. So I interviewed at that institution during my away. And then I definitely recommend doing away rotations because IR is just getting so competitive, and there's nothing like you being at an institution for a month, being the first one there, last one to leave, and them seeing you on a day-to-day basis, seeing how you work like in a team setting, your interpersonal skills. That's just invaluable and can't be compared to a paper application.
Okay, I just want to make sure you're done. Okay, so
sorry.
You're fine. So I similarly, I didn't have any kind of 2-week selective, so I did a lot of shadowing during the weekends and also during my vacation time. And then I did rotation. I mean, I guess it was technically DR at my home institution, but I mostly hung out in IR that time during that time because like the PD was an IR and also just I was really interested in IR. So I spent a lot of time in IR during that month at home. And then I did 3 different aways. So I did an away at Vanderbilt University, I did an away at Emory, and then I did an away at Sinai where I matched. And when I went to Sinai, it was actually after kind of really at the end. I mean, I started during this December, so I thought it was too late, but I basically just went there and was like, I'm not leaving. So I think that's kind of, I would really recommend aways. I think it's really important. Again, if you had a bad step 1 score or if you had bad anything on your transcript, an away is a really good time to get FaceTime and let them get to know you and impress. Also, aways. I think, are we going to talk about where to choose aways later?
A little bit. I'm trying to remember. If you want to.
Okay. I'll just touch on it briefly, but I would say, you can choose your aways wisely as well. Like I knew I wanted a certain place, so I chose to do an away there. You can do that as well. You can also do it where you have mentors. I had worked with someone at Emory previously on a symposium that I had organized at my home institution. And so I went to Emory to do an away kind of with them. And yeah, so I think that's it for me.
One other thing I could just add real quick, when choosing aways, if we don't talk about it later, it could be good to vary it. Like if you pick a very prestigious institution for one away and then choose maybe more of a middle tier one, just to kind of space them out. I also learned during the process that some places, when you do an away there, even if they had like a step one screening, they'll waive that sometimes to give people interviews if they saw how you performed on your away.
And just quickly, like aways can also hurt you, so you have to be very careful. Okay.
True statement.
Yes.
And we'll touch on that in maybe a more detail also. It's a great point. We're going to talk a little bit more about aways just in a couple of slides, but it's an excellent point, and I'm glad you all are talking about it. Millie, do you have anything to add?
So for me, so I'm a DO student and we didn't have a home institution. So for me, and especially since I got interested in IR early, I set up a elective at the beginning of third year. And then during fourth year, though, I set up 4 aways, similar to what Shelby said, kind of just scattered my options geographically because I wanted to be open to going out of state. But I rotated at Christiana Care in Delaware, Penn State, UW, and then Loma Linda, which is where I matched at. And 2 out of those 4 actually did 2 weeks of IR and 2 weeks of DR. In hindsight, I think the DR was if you don't have an elective set up in DR by your school, it's a good experience to go through because you're eventually going to go through a lot of DR training. But in terms of doing aways in DR, I would kind of cap it at 2 weeks if you have to, just simply because it's pretty difficult to impress as a student on DR. But definitely for IRs, like the aways make such a big difference.
Wow. And just a quick follow-up, did any of you 3, Shelby, you mentioned you did the 2-week IR rotation at your home school. Daryl and Millie, did you do a home rotation before your aways?
So I did a home rotation before. No, sorry, I did a home rotation after my Vanderbilt away, but before my other 2 aways. But I again had done a lot of research and shadowing with my home institution, so I knew a lot about IR before I did aways, which was really helpful.
And for me as a DO student, we actually don't have my school didn't have a home institution attached to it. So I kind of had to piggyback off of Kaiser and kind of treat it as in a sense, a home, I guess, institution.
Okay, gotcha.
I do think that the home institution month, if you do have it at your school, is very valuable because it preps you to go on your aways, and having that month with your home institution helps you establish a relationship with them for them to write you a letter.
Okay. We're going to actually dive a little bit more into the rotations. You all have already brought up some really, really important points. So first, talking about the rotation itself, I think we started to talk, I think that was a perfect transition. So what to do during your rotation. So what would you recommend for the best way to prepare for an IR clerkship or a DR clerkship, if that's what you're doing? And how do you get the most out of the clerkship while you're there? And do you have any specific recommendations if you're hoping to ask for a letter of recommendation based on this clerkship? Starting with Daryl.
Okay, so the way that I prepared was really learning about clinical indications and the pathology associated with the various IR procedures that they do. I think a lot of med students that I rotated with on my aways really concentrated on the actual IR procedures, and never once was I expected to know anything about an IR procedure itself. However, I was expected to know a lot about the indications for the procedures, the workup, the management, post-op, all of that kind of thing, seeing patients in clinic. That stuff I was expected to know, and that's the stuff that I think really benefited me that I had prepared. There is a good textbook called Handbook of Interventional Radiologic Procedures. It's by Kandarpa, Krishna Kandarpa. I had that on me kind of at all times. That helps with the actual procedures. That helped a lot. So yeah, but as far as like so that's kind of what I did beforehand. When I got there, the best way I think to really like to do well was to immerse myself with everything. So again, like, really get to know the fellows. You want to round on the patients, treat it like a surgical clerkship. So you want to, pre-round, read about your patients beforehand and procedures, and then, their care after the procedure. You also want to, again, know all of the indications. If you can, try to take call with your team. That can be kind of annoying, so you have to be very careful, because you're not actually adding anything to the call team, right? Because you can't do anything. So you want to kind of approach that with care and not be obnoxious, but you can sort of talk to the fellow that's on call and, give them your number and try to be on call as well. It worked on a few of my rotations and then not on a few as well. So, don't take it personally if it does not work out. And then what else did I do? I think that's mostly it. I asked to do case reports, stuff like that, just really got involved if I could. Ask a lot of questions, but again, I mean, everyone says to ask a lot of questions, and I went to all these symposiums where all of the doctors said ask all these questions, but it's like every other rotation, and I think med students know better than attendings when it comes to asking questions. Like, again, don't be annoying. And yeah, that's really it, I think.
All right.
Yeah.
That's great. That's a lot of very specific stuff. That's very helpful. Millie, do you have anything to add?
Just in addition to all of that, one of the golden pearls that I got actually was to learn how to be a scrub tech. So I think that this would actually be good for you to learn on your home institution before doing the OAs. Just basic, wire handling skills. And I actually had a couple times on my rotations where either, we were short staffed, or I ended up being like a first assist. And the skills just really came into good use. And a lot of times also, like, attendings or fellows, they actually might not let you touch the patient at all, but a good way to show them that, like, you're really serious about IR and you have some of the basic skills is actually just to work the back table, fill the syringes, and being quick and efficient at that. And on AWAYS also, for me, it was a good network to also build. So that relationship, a lot of times I would try to jump on certain research projects, and it was just more so to have another point of building on your relationship with either the fellow or the attendings there.
Wonderful. I think you all are bringing up very valuable things. Catherine, do you have anything to add?
Sure. I think everything Daryl and Millie said, absolutely true. I had that interventional radiologic procedures book on me as well. It's super helpful and has some pretty succinct outlines and stuff, even about like the procedures themselves. That's very helpful. And then also trying to be the tech is definitely helpful. I was able to be first assist on a lot of cases. I did have the privilege of being at a big institution though, where there weren't, like the attending to fellow ratio was in favor of more attending. So I kind of had, I was kind of privileged in that way. But I think along those lines, if trying to round out the slide, just thinking of getting a letter of recommendation based on the clerkship, definitely be very present, ask questions that you are actually interested in that could become like talking points for the two of you, you and the attending. And then also try to stick with one attending if you are at a bigger institution. I think that was the main thing that allowed me to get some letters of recommendation from my IR clerkships, just, kind of the first couple of days going around seeing who I worked with best and who, seemed to be willing to give me a little more independence in the room, and then kind of sticking with that person, even if it wasn't necessarily, cases I was super passionate about. I ended up doing like a ton of Y90s and they're super cool, but maybe not something I want to do with the rest of my life. But the attending was awesome, let me get very hands-on, and was a great person to just kind of make conversation with during the case. So kind of keeping an open mind as to what kind of cases you might find interesting, and trying to figure out who you connect with would be, I think, my pieces of advice, I guess, for getting letters of recommendation. And then I think the only other thing we didn't touch on was preparing for a DR clerkship, which I did a couple of those. I think the main thing, honestly, is knowing what modality for which presenting symptoms is a huge thing. That's a thing I think a lot of residents will ask if you're sitting at the desk with them, just since they know you're not gonna, like find a rib fracture or something, but they do know that if you don't do radiology, and you during your intern year have to order an imaging modality for someone who comes in with X, Y, and Z, you should know what to pick. So that's kind of a common question from them, and a good thing to just kind of look over before a DR clerkship, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for rounding that out, Catherine. Moving right along, I know we talked a lot about away rotations already, so the basic questions that I'd prepared ahead of time is basically how you decide which institution you want to go to, if you felt that an away rotation helped you at a particular school, a particular geographic region, although we sort of touched on that already. And if you had any special advice particular to an away rotation compared to home, although I know we sort of touched on this already, but if there's anything that we haven't discussed already about away rotations, we'd love to hear it.
So for me, in terms of picking where to rotate at, I have a pretty extensive history of being in California. So when it came to application time, I wanted to show that I was very much willing to go out of state. So I had stacked most of my away rotations just out of state, and also I was trying to get mostly the time frame aligned. So I knew I already had my date set for my Delaware rotation, so I needed to find another institution that was kind of around, that East Coast area, so that I could tack on 2 aways at the same time. So that's how I kind of approached things, was by geography, and then also the time frame. And I mean, I guess for me, fortunately, I ended up in state anyways. Didn't really make that much of a difference. In terms of any other advice for away rotations, I'd say be prepared to be tired also, just because you're going to be bouncing, at different hospitals, different institutions. You're going to have to learn the new system, meet new people. Fortunately, on my end as a DO, during my 3rd year, that was pretty much my whole entire 3rd year. I was like moving month to month. So in that sense, I was already kind of used to the grind of picking up and restarting. But just be aware that if you're going to stack multiple aways back to back, you're going to be, tired from having your A game the whole time.
Gotcha. Catherine, do you have anything to add?
Sure. So kind of so CASE is affiliated with 3 different hospitals here in Cleveland. So I actually didn't do any away rotations. I just did rotations at, the different, there are 2 main academic centers. So I just did rotations at both of those, since, we kind of had a home institution, but things are shaking up a bit. So we're kind of affiliated with all of them fairly equally at this point. So I kind of just also had some other funny, my story is a little funny. I really thought I wanted to stay in Cleveland. My husband works here. We thought we didn't want to move. I also thought Cleveland Clinic would be getting its IR integrated pathway up for our application cycle. That didn't happen, and I really wanted to do an integrated one, so then we decided to move, but that was later in the game. So initially I thought I wanted to stay in Cleveland solidly, so I didn't do any aways. But it ended up, I guess I can give the perspective of that, which is it didn't really, I feel, hurt me. I did get interviews from other areas of the country, from some from the South, some from, Midwest, East Coast, West and West Coast-ish. So it didn't, drastically hurt me, but I probably would have done some aways had my story been a little different. But the other thing I kind of feel just as far as scheduling, doing them early if you do need letters of recommendation is a good idea. And I kind of would say, I think most of the applicants here had said they did a home institution, a rotation before and away, which is probably people from your home institution probably have known you a little better, or at least know that you're coming from a reputable school that they're affiliated with, and would be probably more willing to write a letter of recommendation, or at least, wouldn't be quite as up in the air, I would think. So that would be a good reason to do a home rotation as well before and away. That's it from me.
All right. Let's see. And so,
all right, guys, I can add a few more things. I mean, I think everyone's covered most of the pearls on this topic. In terms of how I chose OAs, I chose based on geography. I'm from the East Coast. I went to school in the Midwest, and I wanted to go to West Coast, so I did my OAs on the West Coast. I started with Kaiser LA because having a mentor there, Dr. Vatican Cherry's there, and it's a very friendly environment for students. You get a lot of hands-on opportunities. Then I did a rotation at UCSF where I ended up, and also an IR rotation at UCLA, which I really enjoyed. And I did a DR rotation at UW.
Wonderful. So I think that's great because the way rotations are in a lot of our minds. So another thing that we talk about has already come up in your guys' advice is research. So were you involved in research? Do you feel that it was helpful? And what advice do you have for somebody who wants to get involved but isn't connected with a mentor, or who simply wants to get the most out of their research experience? Starting with Catherine.
So I was involved in research. I did feel it was very helpful for my application. I did what some of the other panelists here have said, which was get involved early on during that summer after my M1 year, which is also kind of how I found my mentor. I had reached out through CASE's alumni network. They have kind of a way you can do that online. So that was really helpful for not only finding a mentor, but finding someone who was from CASE and kind of was, a good connection off the bat. But it was definitely helpful just because it was a lot of talking points come up in interviews about it, just since I had done a couple of different projects. None of it, some of it I had done posters about, but none of it was published in a journal, just to state that off the bat too. You don't need to have something published in a journal. But it was definitely helpful to get involved in any kind of research. And I think if you want to get the most out of your research experience, working with a resident is probably the best way to go. I've done a couple of projects where it's just me and an attending versus me and, kind of working through a resident and an attending. And it's a lot more meaningful, I think, when you have a resident who just has more time to dedicate, or at least is, in the hospital enough that you can meet with them more often and things like that. I think really gave me a little bit more out of my experience when it went that way. If you aren't connected to a research mentor, I do think, if your school has some kind of alumni network or advisors, reaching out to them isn't a bad idea. They typically know at least, who is willing to work with students a little more than some, other students you might talk to or something like that. But also talking to other students, through the IR interest groups or things like that may have done research projects to get you at least connected with someone who's willing to work with students as a starting point. And then I know SIR also offers some opportunities. I personally didn't take advantage of them, but I know they're out there, and maybe someone else can speak more about that. But there are some ways to do research through like the the medical companies that make the product. Oh my gosh, I don't know why I can't think of the right word, but
the vendors.
Yes, thank you. Those companies offer research opportunities as well, so that's another good place to look.
Rana, how's your mic? Are you?
I'm not sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, you're perfect.
Excellent, perfect. So my strategy for research is that I was very kind of vocal that I want to do IR during the second year, and I found, I was asking around and who's doing a research project and with who. Amongst the M3s and M4s in my class, and that's kind of how I got plugged into my research project, and it ended up being really fruitful, and I want to do academic medicine. So I think especially if you're interested in pursuing academia, since so many people on the interview trail say that they want to pursue academic medicine, it would really help if you can actually demonstrate that, and demonstrate that by having done research, done publications, and definitely go to lots of conferences and present your research. And as many people said, that's an amazing opportunity for networking. So I would, even if you want to do academia, I would strongly advise you to find a research mentor and do as much research as possible. If you are not interested in academia, I think research is a great thing to do a little bit of, so that you can present, go to conferences, and network.
Okay.
So I would like to add that as important as doing IR research can be to show your interest in IR, the research you do does not have to be in IR. And so I'm actually in the MD-MPH, or I was in the MD-MPH program at Miami. And so a lot of my research was actually in public health. And that was a big strength to my application, because almost every interview that I went to, the focus of conversation was less on maybe my IR work, but a little bit more on like the work that I did and the research I did in public health. So even if you did research in something else, it's still going to be viewed as a strength, and if anything, it might make you stand out a little bit. So don't be afraid if the research you've already done is in a different field. Would be one thing. And then in terms of finding how to get access to research projects, just find a good mentor would be my best advice. Like, it doesn't matter what the topic of research necessarily is. Yes, of course, it'd be great if it's in something that you're interested in, but I found that if you find a mentor that can really teach you how to do research like well from beginning to end, your life and future life in research will be just so much easier, and then you can decide which topics you want to focus on.
I think that's an excellent point. And moving to another topic that has already come up as well as research is leadership in IR. So just as a full disclosure, all of our panelists have been involved somehow in the RFS or the MSC, that's the Resident Fellows Student Section, or the Medical Student Council. So I'd like to also ask the panelists for this slide, were you involved in your local IR interest group? Do you feel that it's come up a little bit, but do you have anything to add in terms of how helpful these experiences were for your application? And do you have any advice for a student who wants to get involved or who wants to get the most out of this experience? If you have anything to add in addition to what's already been said, there were a lot of good points made already, of course.
One thing that I'd like to emphasize is that joining the RFS, although it's something that, or medical student council or anything with an SIR, although it looks good on your CV, that's not necessarily something that was brought up in any of my interviews. I'm not sure how it was perceived. I'm sure it was perceived positively, but the real value of joining these communities and being involved in leadership in the RFS is really for your own benefit. It really plugs you into the community. You get to meet your future colleagues, people you're going to be working with, people that are going to give you job recommendations in the future. It's a really great thing for anybody who's seriously interested in IR to be involved with. You will feel welcome in the community. When you go to conferences, there will be people there that you know. It really makes the whole application process enjoyable, because you will have a community that you will go through this whole experience with. And also something about leadership in general. I was of the mind that, we do some of these things just to fluff our resume. But if you look at it from the perspective of a future employer, if they see that you've had a sustained leadership role in an organization, from that they can tell that you can work with other people, you can get things done, and you care about contributing to your community. And I think all those things are things that any employer will be looking for. And when they're reviewing your application, they're reviewing it from the perspective of, do they want to work with this person? So I would highly recommend getting involved in leadership within RFS, and also leadership in other areas within your school. I think it will be very positive for you, and it will look great on your application.
Wonderful. Michelle, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I wholeheartedly agree with Rana, and I would say one thing I did was I kind of worked my way up in terms of leadership at my interest group at school. So I started as like a volunteer coordinator, and then I like did more with the research aspect, and then by the end, on my in my fourth year, I was the president of the interest group. And so I would say the earlier you get involved, the more leadership responsibility you can get. And I think that, at least for me, was pretty fun to kind of see how I could grow within the interest group. And then in terms of the how to get involved, even if like let's say you apply for through the application for MSC and like for some reason you didn't get into a group or something that you wanted, it's okay. Like that, I would still try and just contact somebody within the group that you're interested in, and they'll find a way to get you involved. Like, don't get discouraged if like when you apply for something you don't necessarily get it. If you talk to people, you will find a way to get joined into it.
Okay, wonderful. And we definitely, there's people always trying to get connected. And Megan, do you have anything to add in terms of how to get involved or getting the most out of it?
I think that what Ron and Michelle said is 100% correct. I just want to echo that, like, it's okay if you don't get something that you apply for in the RFS leadership. There's only so many positions. There's way more residency applicant spots. So if you don't get it, it's okay. I didn't get one, and I just joined a service line and got involved that way. And definitely go to conferences. And that's actually how I got more involved, just by networking at conferences, and I got plugged in that way. So people are willing to kind of get you into the fold. You just kind of have to be a little persistent, and if you don't get it at first, it's okay. You can still match.
Wonderful. I think that's a good take home for a lot of these things, that in an ideal world, all of these things are perfect and shiny, but if everything's not perfect and shiny, there's a way that you can still match. You can still go and do what you want to do. And with that, I know that time is running short. I've really enjoyed the interplay between the panelists and answering a single type of question between multiple panelists. In the interest of time, we're going to change the format a little bit for the second half, where we're talking about the application itself. So it's going to be a single panelist answering a question about the particular questions on the slide. And then at the very end, the other panelists can jump in with any additional thoughts they have. All right, so moving right along to the application trail. So for letters of recommendation, basically this question would be, this question would be for Michelle specifically. So this would be how many letters would you recommend asking for? What medical specialties would you ask for? How'd you get to know the letter writers? And knowing what you know now, what advice would you give?
Yeah, so I am kind of just, again, my personality is like I want to be over prepared. So I got way more letters than I probably needed. I think I had 6 or so, and the most you can put down per application is 4. So what I ended up doing was I had 2 IR letters. One was from my away rotation, and one was from somebody at my home institution. I had a DR letter. Because I applied not just to integrated IR, but also DR, and so I needed a DR letter. I also had a vascular surgery letter. I had an internal medicine letter because I had a good relationship with that person, and we are also applying for an intern year, oftentimes like a transitional year or internal medicine or surgery, and so I included that letter within those applications. And then I had a letter from my research mentor who was not involved in IR, but was involved in public health. And that letter was actually very useful, and one that I got kind of the most positive feedback from. And that was because that person really knew me well and spoke well about me. And so that, to that end, I'd like to emphasize, yes, getting IR letters and DR letters and everything is important. I'm not saying don't do it, but get the letter that is going to that the person knows you the very best, and that can be within anything. If you did all of the research you've done in dermatology, and your dermatology attending knows you really well and will write well about you, then choose that person as opposed to an IR guy that you don't really know very well, because they're just going to write a generic letter and it's not going to stand out and it's not going to help you in any way. So that's what I would recommend in terms of getting those letters. And so, like I said, the away rotation is a great opportunity. Your home institution is a great opportunity, and don't limit yourself to just radiology field.
Okay. So that covered a whole lot of ground. It's wonderful. So then next to the personal statement, this question's for Megan. So knowing what you know now, what advice would you give regarding writing your personal statement for ERAS? And do you recommend writing different personal statements for IR versus DR residency programs?
So I would start out by saying that your personal statement is in no way an opportunity to air your personal information or problems or anything like that. It should just be about why you are an awesome applicant for whatever you're applying to. I applied for IR and DR, and so I wrote 2 different personal statements. They were pretty similar, but they obviously were tailored to each program. I didn't want to write the same personal statement for both because I thought that it could be off-putting for the DR program directors, but also it's awkward because they'll see both of them, and so it's a fine line to walk. But write them together; they should be consistent. And I would just say that your personal statement should be exclusively why you're going to be an awesome resident and why IR or DR is perfect for you, and just kind of sell yourself. It's not, unless you have a major red flag, like if now is not the time to talk about adversity that you faced or anything like that. Like you don't want to seem like a liability or like a flight risk. So I think that's kind of where I'll leave that.
Oh, great. And then another important component of the application. So, it's not just about, your step 1 and your personal statement and your letters. In general, Shelby, is there anything you wish you had known when you were preparing your ERAS application in addition to those other subjects?
At this point, I don't think that there was anything I wish I knew, because I think a lot of people gave me advice beforehand. One thing I would like to share is that people should take a lot of time to curate your hobbies and interests section. That was the topic of a lot of my interview discussions, talking about my dog walking on Rover or just like your general hobbies, because people get sick of talking about all the other IR-related things when it's back-to-back interviews. So it can help differentiate you from other applicants and make you more interesting.
Great. Whoops. And then for choosing which programs you actually want to apply to, questions for Daryl. How many programs do you recommend applying to in IR or DR? And would you recommend applying to always, if you're going to apply to IR, apply to DR2 at the same program? And just how should an applicant figure out how many programs that they should apply to, and which programs?
Okay, so this is a really good question and something that I've heard different answers from various different program directors. So as far as how many, I can tell you my experience, and then I will ask for some help from the other panelists, just because I've heard so many different answers to this question. But so as far as how many programs did I personally end up applying to, I applied to, and I think that this is so subjective and it really depends on how strong of an applicant you are. And I think that it's very important to talk to your advisor at school and possibly an IR, whatever kind of advisor you have, to make this decision. But I applied to, I think, 38 IR programs, mostly because I didn't apply to California at all. And that's because I was an IMG and I didn't want to pay for that extra application kind of thing. So it's like so personal, and it just depends who you are. I did apply to DR at every place that I applied to IR. And that did not seem like it was a problem to me. I wrote the same personal statement, and I just changed the last paragraph for my DR applications, saying why, why DR is important for IR, basically. And because I felt like I was going to write 2 different personal statements, and then I felt like that was dishonest, honestly, like to me. So I just wrote the same one and then changed it a little bit at the end. I only applied to IR, DR, so I had no other specialties. But that again just depends who you are. I had friends who applied to IR and also applied to internal medicine as a backup. Yeah, so it just depends. I applied to 38 IR programs and about 45 DR programs. Everywhere that I applied to IR, I also applied to DR, and then I chose other DR programs based basically on how good their IR programs were, because I ultimately wanted to do IR. So as far as question 3, again, that's really personal. So it really depends. If you don't have any kind of mentor to speak to or any kind of, advisor at your school, then, reach out to one of us and we can kind of hopefully look at your score. All of it comes into play. So it's hard to answer that question, I think. And again, if the other panelists can answer that, please let me know. As far as the most important, as far as for which programs I was applying, so that's a really good question. And I applied to places based on reputation, based on, how clinical their residency was, how established their IR DR residency was, or was it just DR and then 2 years of IR, or was it like a very clinical IR DR program that had been established over multiple years? That was really important to me. I read this one article that SIR MSC, I think a good friend of mine, Audrey, wrote. She matched at Colorado, and it talks, and PJ Rochon, which is he's the PD at Colorado, he helped her with this, and they wrote a lot about what to look into when you're kind of interviewing and what's important in a program. And I read that article, and that really mattered to me, and it talked about the clinical time and how much clinic different residencies had, stuff like that. But ultimately, what it came down to was somebody that worked to me, and it was, it was the connection and how I had the support and really good mentorship there. When I rotated there, somebody said, he was just completely honest with me, and he said, you know what, you come from a school that's not well known. We've never heard of it. You're not the typical strong IR candidate just because of your school name, and let us help you. Like, we want to help you. This is what you need to do to succeed, all of these things. And they were just the most incredible mentors to me. And so that I wanted to go somewhere that I thought would make me, shine. And I think that that's ultimately how I chose a program.
That's wonderful, and I think at least when I'm applying, I'll be looking for a place that makes me feel supported like that.
Yeah, that was awesome.
All right. We'll maybe leave time for the other panelists to come in at the end. So moving on, we have the question about applying to the intern year program. And so this question's for Millie. And would you recommend specifically doing a program in general surgery versus internal medicine versus transitional year? How did you pick among the 3 when you were applying? And what were you looking for in an intern year and looking at specific programs when you were applying? And how do you think somebody should determine how many intern year programs to apply to?
So in terms of the first question, I think there's a wide variety, a wide range. lots of program directors really recommend doing a gen surge intern year. I personally didn't apply to any internal medicine just because I didn't want a whole year of medicine. So I basically applied to gen surge and also TYs. For the TYs that I was looking at, I wanted to have, I guess, more elective blocks so that I would stack up more surgery rotations during the electives. I'm just gonna say, personally, I feel like having that as a balance is a good, it's a good like balance to strike, having a TY that has opportunities where you can do more surgery. But as of for the gen surge end, which is actually what I landed, it's tougher, but I'm pretty sure you'd get the training that, would make you a better resident and in the future a better fellow or attending, I guess. And I can't really speak as of to how that training really makes a difference because I haven't gone through it myself. But I've talked to quite a few attendings, and they seem pretty convinced that, those who have gone through a gen surge intern year come out, I guess, stronger in a certain way than folks who went through a TY year or a medicine year. So in terms of picking gen surge programs, mine ended up being categorical, so I didn't have a choice. But the programs that I was looking at were mostly at smaller community hospitals. And that way it was more so with the hopes that, I'd get some more OR time, I'd be able to, get some suturing in, kind of have some first assist opportunities. Whereas at an academic place, you're mostly doing floor work, which that's also, skills that we do want to learn, but it's just a very different experience, I'd say. And in terms of how many to apply to, I think I'm kind of, my numbers were kind of abnormal because as a DO, it's kind of, there are biases, I hate to say, but kind of at a disadvantage. So I had to apply to, I think, like 20 surgery programs and then 40 TYs. So it kind of varies. I don't know if the other panelists have different numbers, but yeah.
Okay, great. We'll leave time at the end of this section for other panelists if you have other thoughts or opinions about this topic to jump in. Thanks, Millie. And next, we'll talk about sort of that in-between process. You've submitted your ERAS application, but you haven't heard anything about interviews yet. So asking Catherine, how soon after submitting ERAS do people seem to hear back about interview invitations in IR or DR? And, just based on your experience and other people who are going through the process at the same time, do you think that many programs only offered interviews in IR but not DR, or the other way around? And did you have or would you recommend any contact with residency programs in between when you submitted your application and when you received an invitation to interview?
So I submitted on, the date opened, I think was September 15th. And there are some I had heard of, classmates of mine. Some programs will send, I think the ones that have cutoffs will send some earlier kind of rejection emails. But otherwise, the invitations, I got anywhere from, I think mid-ish late September was when I got my first couple. But they pretty much go for quite a while, especially if there are places, some places do not just send you a rejection email, which, is good and bad because you are kind of left ghosted, but also, you may still have a chance at that place should someone cancel their interview later in the application season kind of thing. So it's pretty much, you can hear back, I would say mid to late September is probably the earliest. And then interviews themselves, the earliest interview I went on was mid-October, but I think some programs start interviewing a little earlier, but safe to say I didn't hear of anyone who interviewed in September. At least that was my experience with that. And then as far as, I think Daryl had also mentioned, all of the programs that she got IR interviews also offered DR, and that was same for me. I applied to 25 IR and got 18, and they offers, and they all offered IR, DR. I didn't have any day where I went and didn't interview with DR staff as well. And then, and the other way around, the places that I applied to IR, I applied to all of their DR programs as well. And then the places that, so I didn't get any that offered me only DR. It kind of came as a package deal. And then the places obviously that I applied to DR, because I applied to more DRs as well, they just obviously offered DR interviews. And then as far as contact with residency programs, I did not contact any residency programs. The only advice, though, I had been at a couple panels at SIR where program directors speak. And the only thing they had recommended was if you do have a bit of a lower step score and are worried you might have gotten, automatically cut off by like their software that just filters through all of the ERAS applications they get, that would be something to that should prompt an email. They said, I think it was the director from Brown and Colorado that both said, if you just email them and say, hey, I'm really interested in your program, and just kind of explain why you're interested in their specific program and why you're interested in IR and things like that, just to kind of say, hey, please look at my ERAS application, I think, is the only time I've heard of people contacting. Otherwise, I don't necessarily know about the couples match, but I've heard some people say that if they are, like if the person they're couples matching with has gotten an interview invite and you haven't, I've heard of couples saying that they have then emailed the program, or the person who's gotten the interview invite would email the program and then also, mention the second person in the couple. So those are the only two instances I've heard of in that sense.
Can I just add one quick thing? Okay, sorry. So another instance is, for example, I was an IMG. I would just say if there's anything kind of like you mentioned already, but if there's anything on your application, like a step 1 score, a couples match, IMG in my case, or anything like that you want to address, then, and you like, I also agree with someone who said prior that you shouldn't put that in your personal statement because, you don't make it negative, this is a good time to just say that and be like, please don't screen me out. I'm awesome. Take a look at my application, kind of thing. So.
Wonderful. I can't, that's an excellent way to say it. All right. And that was Daryl, by the way, right?
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted, I think.
No worries.
No, I was done.
Yeah, you're done, Catherine, on this slide?
Awesome. Yeah, yep.
All right, moving right along. So preparing for interviews. So, for Rana, what do you think is the most important part of preparing for the interview, and do you have any suggestions for this preparation process?
Sure. I think that the most important thing in the interview itself is that you demonstrate good interpersonal skills, that you show that you're kind to everyone and you're polished and prepared. In terms of preparing for the interview, it's really important that you do a mock interview. If your school offers that, or schedule something with your friends, that's definitely something that you should do prior to your first interview. You want to get your spiel ready. People are going to ask you, why are you going to IR? Why DR? They're going to, the common question is, tell me about yourself. You want to have, a 1 to 2 minute answer to those, kind of prepared and ready in your mind. If there's something that is, can be seen, something that can be perceived as a negative thing on your application, you want to be ready to talk about that. And you want to be able to talk about everything you've listed on your application. Sometimes it can be difficult. You've done 10 research projects and they're going to ask you about one poster that you were the 4th author on. You kind of want to have a couple of lines, maybe a summary that you can prepare for yourself of the things you've done and you've listed that you can review. Another thing is that even though interviews it may seem like, you're being asked questions and responding. You definitely do have the opportunity to change the line of the conversation. People are open to it. They're not interrogating you. So if there are things that speak to your personality and the kind of candidate you are, if you can kind of pick out 3 unique things about you that you want every interviewer to know, or the most important interviewers that you're going to be meeting with to know, it's important to kind of have those in mind, have that spiel ready, and find a way to weave that into the interview itself. And as many people already mentioned, your hobbies and interests are going to be things that are going to be the major topic of the conversation in the interview. So make sure you list those in your ask. If there's any sport you do, anything daredevilish, if you have a family, if you spend a lot of time doing art, or you're a musician, you want to list those stuff, and you want to be ready to speak very colorfully about all that. People rather talk about fun things, and that's going to be something that is going to set you apart and make you memorable in a really good way. And then also in some interviews, they will give you a list of people that will be interviewing you. In those cases, you want to look those people up quickly and just kind of look at the research area, and maybe you'll have an idea of what kind of questions they're going to ask, or something that you can ask them. You're going to be asked a lot on the interview trail, what questions you have for me. And you want to have a list of questions ready, a list of generic questions ready that you can ask anybody if they ask you what other questions you have for me. And if you get to know what kind of interviewer you have, you might be able to prepare more smarter questions, more specific questions to them that you can ask them, and that can make a positive impression.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Rana, just sort of a follow-up question from the audience. How did you approach, or how did you broach your interest in IR during an interview for DR? Or did you not really bring it up? Did you have any strategy or rule of thumb that you used?
Yes, I think similar to some of the other panelists, I had one personal statement for both IR and DR, just because I felt like it was disingenuous to kind of say I'm a DR only applicant when I wasn't. I have noticed that in some programs, the DR department, sometimes doesn't have a very positive view of the IR applicants, in the sense that they feel maybe, we're not going to be excited about the 3 years that we're going to spend in DR. And this is, again, very program specific. In those cases, I thought that having done a rotation in DR helps me. I was able to talk about that, and I was able to kind of talk about why I'm really interested in DR, and that I would have done DR anyways. And I understand that there are multitudes of fields within DR that are procedural that would have potentially been also a good fit for me had I been exposed to them earlier. So I think it's important to kind of learn more about DR prior to entering the interview cycle.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Wonderful. And I just want to briefly say, I know that it's 9:30, and I appreciate everybody sticking around. We just have 3 more question slides, and then 1 wrap-up slide, and then we'll get to questions from the audience, just so those of you listening in know what's coming up. That was wonderful, Rana. And so we're going to have 2 slides about the interview day. First slide, questions for Michelle. For the IR program interviews you attended, was there normally some sort of formal DR component? It sounds like this was pretty common based on the previous answers. And then we sort of already broached this topic, but your thoughts in terms of when you're interviewing at a DR only program, do you feel like your experience was different than somebody who was interviewing only in DR and really wasn't applying in IR? And then just a sort of a general tip, because we only interview so much. Did you see any interview pitfalls that might cause applicants to leave a bad impression? And do you have any advice for avoiding these?
Yeah, so starting with the first question, there is typically 1 day for both DR and IR, but not always. There's some programs that it was separated on 2 days. And you might not have gotten an interview for both. So there was only one program that I had that for, and most are integrated in 1 day, and you just stay longer or start earlier. So depending on however that works. But you'll be there from like morning till like from maybe 7 until 5 potentially, versus the DR people will leave at like 2. So that's kind of how the structure is, but it's very program specific. For the DR only programs, my experience with DR versus IR when you apply and like how programs perceive you is similar to Rana. It might put you at a disadvantage to get into a DR program if you are gung-ho only IR without showing your interest in DR. So just keep that in mind. Never lie is a very, I'm very strongly, I believe that you shouldn't lie, but focus on what you like about DR when you talk about it. And you still might get biased against, so just keep that in mind as well. Some common interview pitfalls, I would say, is not knowing exactly what it is you're going to say and kind of being wishy-washy. So don't just go in confident. You're going to sell yourself. That's essentially what you're doing. And people tend to like people who know what they're interested in and what they want to do. So like if there's a question about where you see yourself in the future, obviously nobody can predict the future, but just have some concrete goals of what you want to accomplish. And if you want, you can just state like, obviously everything can change, but as of right now, this is what I want. And this is what I care about. So that's what I would recommend.
Okay, wonderful. And just as a second part for the interview day, actually this question is, let's just have Meghan answer this question, and then other folks can jump in at the end. We've already sort of touched on this topic in terms of interview questions that are guaranteed to come up or interview questions that surprised you. So maybe the most important question is, what can applicants do to assess whether this residency program they're interviewing for is a good fit for them?
Definitely. So I think this is something that's, you kind of just know. It sounds crazy, but once you've been on some interviews, like you're definitely going to get to some and know immediately that this is just not your place. And then you're going to get to others and you're going to be like, these are my people. I would definitely recommend talking to as many faculty as you can and all the residents, and really immerse yourself in that interview day to kind of, that's how you're going to figure that out. But if there are certain things that are particularly important to you, like if you really like to do outdoorsy things, or it's really important to you that your residency program is a very cohesive group and they all hang out together, you can ask specifically about things like that, because different programs have different vibes. But it's kind of something you just know. And outside of when certain things are really important to you, I don't really have a whole lot of advice. I don't know if anyone else does, but I don't think there's like a magic question. I think it's like very personal, and it's very applicant dependent. So I just kind of knew.
Okay. So it just strikes you. And then this is our last question before we do our wrap up of this section with the panelists. So this question's, let's have Millie answer this question, if you would. So it's basically talking about after you've interviewed and when you're deciding about ranking. So did you have any contact with residency programs between your interview and your submission of your rank list, or would you recommend that? And then what was most important to you when you were deciding which programs to rank highly? And do you have any advice in terms of ranking programs that are IR-DR combination programs versus DR only?
So for me, after interviews, I sent my interviewers thank you emails, just very brief, maybe like 3 sentences max. And then prior to submission of my rank list, once I had my top 3 figured out, I actually used that same email thread and just basically hit reply to the program directors of the top 3 places, just to let them know that that I'll be ranking them highly. That actually is a very tricky thing to kind of go around, because I think for your #1 program, it's easy to say, oh, you're my #1, but kind of figuring out the wording for your like #2 and #3, that can get tricky. Yeah, and then in terms of how I decided how to rank my programs, I think Megan had kind of touched upon this, but it was more so like on interview day or on your rotation. You know, did I click with these people? Did I click with the residents, with the attendings? And to me, it was mostly about the vibe that I got. Because if you don't click with, if you think a group is weird, like you're going to be spending at least 5 years with them, then that's a lot of time. And then other factors that kind of came into play was, you know, location, and the variety of cases that were available, and also I kind of looked into how much hands-on experience and autonomy the fellows had, the current fellows have, because certain programs were a little bit more attending heavy in terms of procedure wise, whereas other programs were very like hands off. The fellows, you know, got to scrub in and take their cases first. So kind of, there's a wide range, and hopefully, yeah, everyone kind of has their own priorities, and kind of like figuring that out for yourself is important. And then in terms of how I rank my programs, I definitely stacked my top favorite IR programs first, and then I had DR programs that I had really enjoyed, and they were also very strong in their IR experience. So I had then put those behind my IR ones, and then I had a couple of IR ones that were like, to me, kind of like in the middle. Like I didn't love it, didn't hate it, so I kind of scattered that in, you know, the afterwards, with the rest of my DR programs that I thought were just okay. And I would definitely say that, you know, have a good distribution of maybe like a third of the programs that you thought were kind of above your reach, a third that are within your reach, and then a third that are safety, because not matching is also horrible, and I've had classmates who didn't match, and it's kind of it's extremely painful to watch. So kind of when you're deciding whether or not you want to rank this DR or IR program, you're kind of in that decision process of, you know, would I rather not match, or would I stick it out for this program for like, you know, 5 or 6 years? So
yeah, you're bringing up a lot of really important things that we don't always talk about. And so I didn't mean to rush the second half. You all have given such really insightful and specific advice. I do want to give everybody the opportunity to share their thoughts on a topic that maybe they didn't speak about on a particular slide regarding the application process. So this is the slide for that. So if you have anything else that you wanted to add to what's been said before, that maybe you didn't get to speak about, this is a slide for it. If there isn't anything, that's fine also, starting with Megan.
One little tidbit that I have is everyone talked about the Candarpa book, which is awesome, and I use it on all my ways. But if you buy it, you can like use a little scratch off code, and you can actually download it onto your cell phone, which I thought was really helpful because I didn't have to like lug that book around, because although it is small, it doesn't really fit in your scrub pocket, and it, like, I don't know, it can be cumbersome. So, and then also you can get Kaufman's book. I forget what it's called, but just Kaufman's IR book is good too. It tells you about like just really basic stuff that someone might not ever teach you. So that's it. Thank you so much, Lana. This has been really great.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. Well, and I'll give you all a formal thank you at the end as well. Shelby, do you have any sort of key advice, other burning advice that you really think people applying should know?
Sure. Just to touch on something we talked about earlier, the contact with institutions. Maybe you haven't heard from them. You know, other people have gotten an interview. I did reach out to some programs, and I got, I think, 2 interviews after reaching out via email. just emphasizing to them that I am from that home state or have ties in the area or specific reasons why I was very interested in that program. And then they'll take another look at your application, and it's just worth a shot. I would wait a decent amount of time until you send that email, but just so you all know that it is possible. And then I also did send some follow-up handwritten thank you notes after interviews, and also sent letters to my top 3. It is a fine line for sure. I told my top 1 that they're my top 1, and then the other ones I just said you're highly ranked, you're in my top choices. But I do think it's something that you should consider, just because it's so competitive and they want to know that you are equally as interested in them. Once you decide who your top 1 is, don't go back on that, because it's a small community and they definitely want to make sure that you're being truthful when you send them a letter like that. And then finally, one thing I learned on the interview trail, I didn't get a letter from one attending at my institution, and then I was in a certain state, and a lot of the hospitals there kept mentioning this attending. And so I thought to myself, it would have been smart to work with that doctor more to be able to get a letter from them if you think about it and you try to be more strategic. Because those doctors at that institution would have valued a letter from that attending because they trained with her and they would have known her. So it's just something I thought I could have utilized more. You can kind of target your letters to different institutions based on who might know other people. Something to keep in mind. But that's it.
Yeah, thank you. Daryl, any last minute advice for our applicants or our future applicants?
I think that Meghan and Shelby really hit it on the head.
All right.
The nose, sorry.
The nose. Okay. All right. Millie, do you have anything you'd like to add? Any last advice, take-home advice for the applicants or the new batch of applicants?
So kind of a little bit random, but one tip that I got from a previous resident was that to set up a separate email account for ERAS. I had classmates who were checking their phones every time their phone buzzed for an email, but I had a separate email for it, a separate vibration and separate ringtone for it, so I knew when like invites came out, like I knew that this was what I want to respond to like ASAP. So that really kind of helped calm the stress down for me when it came to invites. And I also have actually already a video that's out on YouTube. It's actually geared towards my home institution, but I think there's a lot of things that are applicable to other applicants. So if you just want to Google navigating through Western U ERAS, that'll pop up, and that's just stuff on my own tips and my own process that, for ERAS.
Oh, that's wonderful. And also, Millie, I don't know if you have the link available right away. You can, if you could share it with the entire audience via the chat. I know a lot of people would be really interested.
Okay, sure.
Thanks. And Catherine, any take-home advice for applicants?
Yeah, I think everything that's been said, I think kind of has been along the lines of just this is a really personal kind of thing for each and every one of us. And I think one piece of advice that kind of helped me stay grounded was to really consider your own personal priorities. Do you want to do research or not? Do you just, having family in the area of your work, is that something that's important to you? Your hobbies, the weather? I mean, just remember in a lot of these times, getting advice from people is great, but it does kind of get confusing, to be honest, especially going on these interviews. You really sell yourself and sell the fact that you want to be at that place on your interview day, which is exactly what you should be doing. But I mean, remember that it is your life. And when you are coming to think about how you rank things and where you really want to go and what you prioritize, don't kind of let the cloud of what you should do or what you think other people are telling you to do, cloud that, because it's very stressful, and just stay grounded in your priorities. And I think things will work out in your favor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great point. We definitely have this webinar because we we all are curious about the process, and we want to make sure that we, don't miss something because we didn't realize to do it. But at the end of the day, we all want to apply to IR and have our application be all that it can be because we want to practice IR. We want to be good IR doctors someday. So I think that's a great point. Rana, do you have anything to add, take-home advice for applicants?
Can you guys hear me? Sorry, I think my audio cuts in and out.
We can hear you okay.
Excellent. My only advice that hasn't been talked about is that, especially on OA rotations, it's really important that you are very kind and respectful towards your peers that are on the, that are also doing OAs. I think sometimes people, you invest a lot of time and energy, and as Millie said, you're very tired as you're trying to be your best self on these OAs. And I think it's really important to know that that even though your peers may not be getting you this job, they're going to be your colleagues forever, and you don't want anyone walking away from the experience and talking negatively about their experience with you. So I would definitely keep that in mind as you go on to do OAs during fourth year.
Definitely. And then to round us off, Michelle, do you have any take-home advice or last word?
Yes.
For the panel?
So I will speak quickly. One thing I want people to realize, like, this is 6 years, and this is kind of a time in a lot of people's lives that you might be like wanting to start a family, or like depending on whatever your priorities are. Keep in mind that it's 6 years, and so having support like family nearby can be helpful for whatever point in your life you're at. So I think a lot of people do take that into consideration. So just keep that in mind. One thing is, step one is important, and people get really scared about it. And I just want people to not be so fearful that you go crazy. Do the very best you can. Yes, it is an important part of this process. I cannot sugarcoat that, but there are ways to make it work. And you can't change, you can't control the future. And you can't, you don't know what's going to happen, so there's no point in worrying about it. Just do what you can, and afterwards, whatever the result is, you'll find a way to make it the best for you. The other thing I wanted to say is, one thing that you may want to, this is a strategy concept that you can take as you wish. If you're a weaker candidate, it might be worthwhile to consider just applying for DR and going the ESIR route instead of applying for both IR and DR. And the reason I say that is I found that people who were maybe not as strong applicants who applied to both were kind of put at a disadvantage for getting interviews for DR programs. This is from my own experience. And the people who just applied DR, even though they knew they wanted to do IR someday, got more of those DR interviews. That's just my experience, so something to consider depending on what your application looks like. Last thing, sorry that I have so many points, but the Student Factor Network Forum also is something that was very active in this application cycle, and people wrote a lot of things and put updates as to when interviews went out, and it was helpful for me, but people also go crazy checking it constantly and getting worried, oh my God, I didn't get an interview. Just be grounded. Realize that just because you didn't get an interview on that first wave or whatever doesn't mean that you're not going to get an interview. And that might also give you an indication when it's a good time to start emailing program directors to let them know, look, I'm really interested. Can you take a look at my application one more time? So that is something that I recommend. And then for the intern year, most program directors recommend doing a surgery intern year. My perspective on it was similar, that it's possible. I think you have a lot of flexibility doing a transitional year, but if you end up doing a transitional year and then you go into DR thinking you're going to do ESIR, just realize it may or may not put you at a disadvantage to have that transitional year when you apply for that independent year, independent IR application. So just keep that in mind. It might strengthen your application to have a surgery year if you're going the ESIR route.
So that's it.
Yeah, those
Can
are
I
a
just
lot
say
of good
something
ones.
quick? Can I,
Mhm.
sorry, can I say something quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. This is Daryl, right?
Yes, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I just wanted to say that also, I mean, I agree with everything that everyone said, but I also think that like the interview trail was such an amazing opportunity to meet people in the field, kind of like what Rana said earlier about joining RFS and SIR and getting to know your peers and your mentors, people in the field. The interview trail, I got to see like so many incredible programs and meet so many incredible faculty. If you can, try not to cancel your interviews and like go on these interviews and meet these people because it's an incredible experience.
Well, it gives us something to look forward to. As much, yeah, I'm a fourth year, and I know I'm feeling some anxiety about the application trail, but that paints it in a much friendlier light.
And one last thing,
Mhm.
on that note, don't be afraid to update programs throughout the entire process. Like even after I had interviewed at programs, I found out that I got accepted for my SIR abstract. I was going to be giving an oral presentation at SIR. So those are like big things to update programs about, because in the end, you want to impress them so that they'll rank you. So just update them with any like notable changes in your application.
And this was Shelby, right?
Yes, that's Shelby.
Yeah, wonderful.
This
Is
is
anybody
Michelle.
else? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, this is Michelle again. Just remember that you guys are awesome. It's like easy to get discouraged and like struggle through this time, but you guys are awesome no matter what, and whatever you do, whether or not it's IR, you're gonna make it great, and we're gonna be doctors. So just keep that in mind.
Exactly. And you get the opportunity to like finally people are like trying to get you, which is the most incredible thing. Like all through medical school, you're like sucking up and getting letters of rec and whatever you have to do to make it, and finally people are shopping for you in a way, So it's a really cool.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a real different experience, and I want to thank you all. On that note, I know that it's been a long webinar. We've covered a lot, and I know that I'm so happy that so much of the time spent in the webinar was listening to your guys as the panelists' opinions and thoughts. You shared so much good advice that makes me feel better, and also gives me an idea of very specific things that I should be thinking about. So. As a fourth year and also somebody who's been thinking about IR for a couple years, and you have that, how do I get involved and all of that, I feel like you guys covered a lot of ground in a very helpful way. So actually, in the interest of time, I think we're going to pass over the question and answer session. But if anybody in the audience has any questions for the panelists, what you can do is you can go you can send me an email, so that's at sir.msc.education@gmail.com, and I can forward your email to panelists you're interested in, and that way, if they're able, have anything, any advice they want to offer, we can do that. So really, this is the end of the webinar. What I really want to make sure to do is thank our panelists. These are medical students who have graduated and they're getting ready to start their intern years, and they've taken the extra time in this case, to share their experience with us, and to really, I feel like they give us a very open, honest, and positive opinion of this whole process. So I really want to thank our panelists. I also want to quickly thank Chris Malloy, Lauren Park, and Erin McBride for helping with this webinar. I know it was much improved with their help. And so the meeting is going to be recorded, so you can find it on the RFS YouTube channel. And so with that, I'd like to adjourn the meeting, and thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you, Sana.
Thank you, and good luck, everyone.
Yep, good luck.
Thank you. Best of luck.
Thank you. All right, good night.